Hello everyone! In today's lesson we are looking at ray diagrams for curved mirrors. So in our last lesson we looked at plane mirrors, which are flat mirrors, and now we're looking at curved mirrors. Just a reminder that we will still be describing the properties of the image using size, attitude, location, and type. So first we need to talk about some things. There are two types of mirrors. The first is concave. Now, what concave means is that the object we're talking about is on the center of sort of that concavity. So the object is on the same side as the inside of that concave circle. There's a few other pieces of information. So if this is our mirror right here, we have our principal axis. The principal axis is the point, it's sort of an imaginary axis, that connects with the mirror at sort of exactly the middle. And this middle point is very important, and I'll get to that later. Now, there's a few other things. We also have the center of the curvature labeled as C, and we also have a focal point labeled as F. So the space between C and the mirror is the radius of the curvature. So that just basically means the radius of the circle. Because what we could do is we could extend this circle out, or this mirror out, so that we get a big circle. And so that center, if I had drawn a better circle, would literally be at the center of our sort of imaginary circle. There we go, that's a better one. And anytime we have a curved mirror, whoops-a-daisy, we're also going to have a focal point. And so the distance between the focal point and the mirror is labeled as F. So a concave mirror has the the reflective surface on the inside of the curve. So one important fact about the focal point is the focal point will always be exactly halfway between the center of the curve and sort of that point where the principal axis meets the mirror. Another way we say focal point is principal focus, which basically means that is the point where light rays will focus. So as you can see in this diagram, our incident rays are blue. Remember, incident rays are the rays that are going towards a mirror. And our reflected rays are red. And every single one of our reflected rays is going through the focal point. So they converge at that point. This becomes one of our rules for drawing ray diagrams later on, and I'll show you how or what I mean later. Now, I just talked about how those reflected, if a parallel ray comes in, then the reflected ray will always go through the focal point. And I want you to understand why. Because we're still following the law of reflection, where the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. But it looks a little bit different because the mirror is curved. So here's our normal right there. I've drawn it in yellow. And the normal is perpendicular to the surface of the mirror at that point. And you should be able to see that our angle of incidence is equal to our angle of reflection in both cases. So regardless of what type of mirror we're looking at, that law of reflection is always maintained. So again, we have this idea of an image forming. The image is where the reflected rays intersect. So if we have an object up here and we have rays coming off of it, then the point of intersection is going to be where the image forms. So all of those reflected rays converge at that point, that yellow point I just drew, and so that's where the image will appear. I'm going to show you how we draw these ray diagrams in just a moment. When drawing ray diagrams, we're going to use, it says 2 rules, we're actually going to use 3. So the first rule is parallel to focal. I know this makes 0 sense, I promise it'll make sense in a bit. So the first rule is parallel to focal. The next rule is focal to parallel. I'm just going to write that down. So P to F, F to P, and we do have one final rule. Our final rule is going to be V to V. So if you recall that this line, this black line right here, is called the principal axis. So one thing I did forget to mention is that point where it meets the mirror has a name, and that's called the vertex. So our final rule, goodness, I have such a hard time saying that, is V to V. So it just means into the vertex and out of the vertex. Now this vertex is a really important part of the mirror because it is the one place where a light can hit, and it sort of acts as if it is a plane mirror, and the reflected ray bounces off in sort of a way that is familiar, as if we were sort of acting as if it was a plane mirror. And so it at this one place, it does not act as the rest of the rays. I mean, it's still following the law of reflection, but it just acts a bit different. Okay, so when drawing a ray diagram, we're going to follow our rules. So what you see here is our mirror. We have our principal axis with our center labeled, our focal point labeled halfway between the vertex and the center, and we have an object. Like I said for the last one, the object, what it is, doesn't matter. I could draw anything. You'll often see us drawing arrows, just because it's easiest and simplest. Now, when we're drawing an object, the very first rule is that you have to start from the top of the object. So as you can see, these lines are starting from the top of the object. Now, beyond starting from the top of the object, the order that you follow the rules does not exactly matter. So remember, our rules are parallel to focal, focal to parallel, and V to V. So what's drawn here in this image is our parallel line. So our parallel line is here, and they've also drawn our focal line, okay? So this line is parallel to that principal axis. That's what it means by parallel. What it means by focal is it is a line running through the focal point towards the mirror. So it's going from the top of the object through the focal point towards the mirror. You are supposed to use a ruler to do this. And that will ensure sort of best results. So we've done our focal point, and now we need to do the red stages. So the next one is focal. So that means that it's going to bounce off the mirror and into or through the focal point. Notice that I have arrows. The arrows are really important because it indicates the direction of the sort of the way the light is traveling. Now I'm going to draw a parallel line. So P is parallel. So it hits the mirror, this one, and bounces off parallel. Now I've done this one, I've done this one. The only rule left is V to V, or vertex to vertex. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my line to vertex and draw my line through vertex. You will notice that they intersect right here. This is where they intersect. So now that we've found, oops-a-daisy, the point of intersection, we now actually have to draw the image. So I'm going to quickly erase this, just hopefully to make it as clear as possible. And the image, because the tip of this image was what we used to, the tip of this object was what we used to find the image. Where they intersect this corresponds to the same point. And then we draw our arrow, because that was our shape, with its base on the bottom. So notice it's upside down. If we draw the salt, if we want to talk about the image properties, the size, I don't know, it looks to be maybe a bit smaller. If we look at the attitude, it is inverted, because remember attitude means upright or inverted. Okay, if I spelled that wrong, I'm sorry. Location is between C and F, because as you can see, here's C and here's F, and it's between them. You could also say it's on this side of the mirror. And the type is real, because I could put a screen over here, so like a piece of paper, and I could project that on the screen. The other way of remembering it is over here is real, because this is the real world. The object exists in the real world. Whereas behind the mirror is virtual, because the object is on the real side, not the virtual side. So if you check out my slideshow, it walks you through those steps, step by step, just like I did. Here is our final sort of ray diagram. Notice the image, the point is where those lines intersect, and the sort of butt or base of that image is runs along the principal axis. So it is important to know that where you put this object will change what the image looks like. Notice here, the object is now between C and F. Before it was, I don't know, somewhere over here. So we've moved the object closer to the mirror between C and F, and the image, the resulting image, is still inverted, but it's larger than the initial object. So depending on where we put this object, it will change the characteristics of the image. If we are using rulers, there are actually sort of expected results from what we will see based on the placement of the object. But if I'm asking you to describe the salt of an image, I'm asking you to sort of do your best and sort of be logical about it. So in our past scenario, we had an object that was, I don't know, here was it? Now, our image will change a bit, but the rules will look the exact same for anywhere between this space. So whether we put the object here, 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 the rules still stay the same. Now, if we put an object on the focal point, the rules are still the same, but they look a little bit different. So if you recall, our rules were parallel to focal, focal to parallel, and V to V. So this time I'm going to start with V to V. Remember, this is the vertex. So drawing down, ideally I'm using a ruler, and always put the arrow because it shows the direction. Then I'm bouncing out. So that is my V to V. Check, done. Now I need to draw my parallel. So I'm going to draw a line parallel to the principal axis. Check, and then draw my focal line. So it's going to go through the focal point. Here's where it gets tricky. I need to draw the focal, my focal, okay? So that means that it needs to somehow go through the focal point, but also go in the direction of the mirror. Now, you notice that the focal point is under the object and the mirror is over here. So there is no way that I can draw this. It is not possible to go towards the mirror but simultaneously through the focal point, which means I do not draw this line when the object is on the focal point. Now, you need to look at our reflected rays. So in this case, we have our red focal point reflected ray and our green vertex reflected ray. They appear to be parallel with each other. And if I had a ruler, they would in fact be parallel with each other. Whenever we do not see reflected ray lines that intersect, we are going to extend the reflected rays. But because they are parallel, they never connect. So they never intersect, which means that there is no image. No image will ever be formed when the object is on the focal point. So we have one more scenario where our object is between F and V. So again, it looks different, but technically the rules are still the same. We have parallel to focal, focal to parallel, and V to V. So I always like to start off with, let's do V to V. It's easiest here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that and draw that out. Then I am going to draw parallel next. So parallel is parallel to that principal axis, and then it's going to run through the focal point. So nothing changes here. I know it looks a little bit different, but it is the same, I promise. Now we need to draw our focal. So same as last one. Last one was tricky because it wasn't possible to draw. This time it is in fact possible. I encourage you to now pause your video and see if you can figure out how you can draw a incident focal ray, so this one right here, that is aligned with the focal point but going towards the mirror. You may have to stop and replay that a bit. Anyhow, let's hope that you paused the video and gave it a try. I'm going to just tell you the answer. So if I draw my incident ray like that, you'll notice that if I draw that out, it is in line with that focal point. So this incident ray up here, is going towards the mirror while simultaneously being in line with the focal point. This was not possible on our past example because the object was on top of the focal point. So this is a very different scenario. Next, I'm going to draw my parallel ray, and so that's just going to be parallel to the principal axis. You will notice that our reflected rays do not intersect over here. When that happens, just like the plane mirror, we have to draw the extension of the reflected ray. Only the reflected ray. Notice that I am using red to more or less represent the reflected ray, with the exception of my V to V, I guess. So you should notice that they intersect up here. That means that my image will be right there. And we can extend our little principal axis if we want, and now it's time to talk about salt. So anytime you're drawing an image, you're going to have to tell me about the characteristics. So size is larger. Attitude is upright this time. as opposed to inverted. Location, we would just say behind mirror. And type, can you remember what type it would be? It's either virtual or real. In this case, the answer is virtual, because it cannot be projected onto a screen. So that's it for concave mirrors and sort of the three different scenarios that can occur with concave mirrors. Now we need to talk about convex mirrors. Convex mirrors are the same idea, except that the reflective surface is on the same, is on the sort of outside of the circle, and this changes the location of the focal point and the center of the curvature, because the center is going to be in the middle of that circle. This also causes the focal point to be negative. So if you're working with equations, this means that the focal point should be negative. So another way that we talk about types of mirrors is in the terms diverging or converging. It's important to know that convex mirrors are diverging. What that means is when it hits the reflective surface, the lights diverge. This is in contrast to a convex mirror where the lights will eventually converge. Oops, daisy. So you see here that they're converging. So sorry, I think I misspoke, but a concave mirror is also a converging mirror, whereas a convex mirror is a diverging mirror. Convex mirrors will always produce a virtual image, always, always, always. When we're talking about convex mirrors, the rules are the same, but a little bit different. And so what I mean by that is when we have our parallel ray going towards the mirror, the reflected ray will have an extension that points towards the focal point. And same is true for the focal to parallel. I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, here's our mirror. Notice this time it is a convex mirror. And we already have our object, and the focal point is on the right-hand side of the mirror. Now, just be aware that it is interchangeable, so this would be the exact same sort of question. It's just that I put it in its mirror image, basically. So we need to draw our lines here. And so same as always, we have parallel to focal, focal to parallel, and V to V. So as always, I'm going to draw my V to V in there, out there. Always draw arrows. So they have already drawn our parallel lines, so that's that one right there. And if it is going to bounce out of the focal point, then we are going to direct that reflected ray up here, which means if we extend that reflected ray, it will go through the focal point. Now, if we look at our next rule over here, we have this line going towards our focal point. This incident ray, if we extend that line, it's in the direction of the focal point so that it would meet up if it could sort of pass through that mirror. But of course it can't, because the mirror is a solid reflective surface. So it bounces back, and the reflected ray will bounce back parallel. Now you remember earlier I talked about how convex mirrors are called diverging mirrors. You'll notice that these lines do not connect. They diverge, they split up. If, for some reason, they do connect, you've made a mistake. Now, any time where we do not have a sort of intersection of lines over here, we need to extend the reflected rays. So I've already done that for this one, right? For this one right here. Now I'm going to do that for the reflected rays only, for this parallel line and my vertex as well. And so my intersection of points is right there, and my image is going to be there. Draw that in black just so that you can see it. If I was using a ruler, it would be a lot neater and the lines would match up perfectly, but sometimes if you're not using a ruler, the lines will get a bit funky. So let's talk about salt. The size is smaller. The attitude is upright. The location is between F and mirror. Well, F and you could call it the vertex or the mirror. And the type is virtual because, again, the object is over here. That's the real world. So that's real, and this is virtual. Just keep in mind that this switches when we start to talk about lenses. So again, if you go take a look at my slideshow, it will show this step by step. Here is the final ray diagram for a convex mirror. If you want to go take a look, please be sure to practice these a lot. Some students find them challenging, and practice is the best way to have a good understanding of them. Let me know if you have any questions. I would be more than willing to help. Good luck!